there's no reason to reach on players like this. Even if you get this right, it's kind of process over results type thing that I'm alluding to. If you wanted to piss me off, this is the draft to like execute right here. You don't need to do it. You don't need to go 307. What you also don't need to do is go Will Shipley at 3.06. Ben sent it again. I have to do it. I really do. And for this reason specifically, welcome back to another DU draft review. These are coming at you fast and furious. Really excited to do this series with Jake. Again, we're just going to be walking through these drafts, seeing if we can glean anything, see if we can learn anything. And I want to start off with just talking a little holistically about this draft. I think this one was a little bit more on par, right? If you saw our first Dynasty Underdog Listener League 1 draft review, this is our second Listener League. If you saw our first one, you noticed that the board was a little atypical, a little substandard, I think, given where some of the picks went. They were a little wonky. Some guys who fell a little bit too far, maybe drafted a little too high. This one feels a little bit more on par with what we're seeing on average, right? So I think the only two that really stuck out to me were maybe JT Sanders going a little too high and then Michael Penix going a little bit later than what we typically have seen. He has gone a little bit higher. And in our first Dynasty Underdog Listener League, we saw him go 201. So definitely further than that. But let's get into, this a little bit more granularly. Who do you think in this draft, looking at it, Jake, was picked a little bit too high here? I mean, I said it was a little bit more average, a little bit more standard, but was there anything out of the ordinary to you that stuck out in terms of players picked too high?
Yeah, I'll jump right into it. Let's just kind of highlight at the very bottom, we have two supplemental picks, kind of similar to the first draft, where we have basically the 213, 214. Brendan Rice at the 214 is absolutely bonkers. Like, I don't care what you think his role could be this upcoming season. There's just too many quality players sitting behind them. Once again, we have Ben Sinnott. Once again, we have Marshawn Lloyd. Once again, we have Jalen Polk. Once again, we have Jermaine Burton, McMillan. The list honestly just goes on of players that I would take over Brendan Rice. And so just seeing him go as high as he did just really makes me question what was going on with that person at the time that they decided to make that draft pick. What about you?
Yeah, and I mentioned this. So I mentioned this in the first draft review of our first Listener League. And I think that maybe this mindset is seeping in again, where it's like, it's a supplemental pick. Let me just do whatever I want with this and ignore ADP, which at some level, like ignoring ADP, you can have a discussion around that. But it seems like that may be an idea that is seeping into this supplemental pick, it being a supplemental pick, not being in order necessarily, where you're also picking it manually, like they're sending me, who they want. But again, you have the ADP in front of you, so you should be going by that. But I think that may be something that is seeping into their brains. So just wanted to kind of highlight that again. For me, a player that was picked far too high was Luke McCaffrey. We see him going at 3.3 on the first edition of this. You'll notice that, we like McCaffrey kind of where he went, but he went a whole round later plus an extra pick. I think he went like 404, 405. So he went a whole round later. I liked it a lot more. There's no reason to reach on players like this. Even if you get this right, it's kind of process over results type thing that I'm alluding to. So for me, it was just a little too high for that reason. Jake, what about a player that was picked far too low?
I think there's two, and they're in the same range, honestly. I'm going with Javon Baker at the 312, so really the 402, and Kamani Vidal at the 405, I guess 407. And you're just looking at those two players. In most rookie drafts, you're talking about Vidal, who ranges anywhere between the 305 to the 310, and Baker basically in that same range, and being able to get both of them outside of that range is bonkers to me. What about you?
Yeah, I got to agree on Vidal as well, but I want to throw one in there. As I'm looking at this board, I didn't even notate this, but Ben sent it again. I have to do it. I really do. And for this reason specifically, I traded to get up to that pick. So somebody was willing to fade him in that regard as well. Like, I don't need him. I can trade back and get whatever I want. And so I traded the 304 and the 404 for the 301, which ended up being Spencer Rattler, who I think we can agree went maybe a little early again, and Theo Johnson for Ben Sinnott. So I mean, if Spencer Rattler works out, again, it's like a process over results thing. Again, it'll look okay. But I think, again, we're fading Ben Sennett past the second round. People look at this profile. Somebody, it's not just this draft happened whenever it did. Somebody on Twitter 2 days ago said, why are we so interested in Sennett? His profile doesn't look great. And I don't get it. Like, there's nothing about his profile that doesn't look great. So that sentiment is traveling around the community, and for some reason it's sticking. I don't know why, but I had to mention it again. Okay, I digress. Get off my soapbox. What do you think is the biggest mistake in this draft?
Feels like we are talking about so many other mistakes. So I'll try and like jump outside of the box, right? I think Jacob Cowing at the 307 is a pretty big mistake in my opinion. Just sitting there around the other values. I've been in now 7 drafts so far. He's gone undrafted in 3 or 4 of those 7. And to see him go in the middle of the third, I think is just absolutely bonkers. By all means, we love Cowling's profile. His draft capital was awful. The actual landing spot is awful if all the wide receivers are staying there this year. And so he really just comes down to circumstance. He's someone that I will happily bid for heavily as a waiver wire pickup, but I will not try and draft him right now in a rookie draft.
That makes a lot of sense. I do think that he's hit waivers so many times. So for me, it just makes no sense to go here. I get the landing spots appealing, but it's just going to be so hard for him to find work, and he's just going to have to be a massive outlier. So you don't need to do it. You don't need to go 307. What you also don't need to do is go Will Shipley at 3.06 right before Jacob Cowing. Again, back-to-back picks, which I think we had kind of in our first episode as well that we were a little underwhelmed with. And it's just one of those where I don't hate the player. I think, the opportunity behind Saquon is good. Like, that's, a place where you want to have the handcuff. I get it, but you don't need to do it. It's again, that idea that you don't need to do this in terms of ADP. Will Shipley is running back 11, 41st overall. Like, you don't need to do it here. And if you're going to do these kind of things, you need to employ the trade back method, where you're going to say, look, I'll do whatever I can. I have an 8-hour clock. Let me sit on this and make a trade back. And we had a lot of movement in these drafts. I think you could have done that here.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing I will note, and I know this just because I know the owner, I know the team, this owner does have Saquon Barkley. Does that add any value to you when you're drafting and in these types of situations? Like, are you willing to draft above ADP to provide or to take away your handcuff from somebody else?
Not really. I don't I don't typically like to do that, because there's diminishing returns with that strategy anyway. You're not getting the same player as Saquon Barkley when he goes, if he were to go down, let's say. You're getting, a quarter of that maybe, and then they're going to add somebody else in there to split the work most likely, and he's probably going to do most of the pass catching work. So for me, like, in general, I don't mind rostering my own handcuffs at all, but like, I also don't think it's like the most pressing matter to where you need to reach on it. And so I don't know, man, in this spot, like, I just feel like you're missing out on so much value with like the Burton McMillan group that you almost can't do it, because if one of those guys hits, you can trade them for a much better running back. You know what I mean? So it's just kind of, a cost benefit analysis, and like what you're getting versus what it could be and what you could do with it, like the return on the investment at the end of the day. So that's how I see it. Great question, though. I love that. All right, who do you think had the best draft?
Yeah, I think this goes as almost the same reasoning as I went with for D1, for those of you who watched. But really, I picked bought, not bred. And that's our buddy David. David honestly just acquired top end value for each pick. And we can talk about this ad nauseum. But like I said in the first draft, and this is exactly what David did, is he picked up the Superflex quarterback in Michael Penix, who will not be a starting quarterback in the NFL for at least 2 years. I think we're all pretty acclimated to that idea, right? But the reality is that he now has an asset similar to what Jordan Love sat through that is going to acquire value in 2 years to a point that he is probably going to make a profit on it as soon as he pushes him up off the taxi. Jermaine Burton, I know this because I've tried to buy him already. most people want at least a mid-second for him. And he was able to get him at basically the 312, at the 310, but because of the two supplemental picks. And the same thing with Javon Baker. We're talking about two super hyped dudes. And given that this draft did have an additional two supplemental picks, he did pick up a pretty interesting piece in Anaya Smith. I don't think that he's necessarily a top-end talent, but I do think that the situation actually bodes really well for him to have a role in his rookie year. And sitting there at the 410 and allowing, basically Ali and Jordan Travis to finish out the draft means that he didn't really miss out on any value that was going to be pushing into waivers. So all in all, I thought David did a great job here.
That's a great shout, man. Javon Baker, I was texting you, I remember during this, I'm like, I want Baker to just fall to me here. And of course he takes him one pick before me. I'm totally happy to get Ray Davis in the 4th. I think that's fine value. And especially with what went after him, I probably could have gone Vidal there and felt good about it too. But I was really banking on Baker falling. So that one hurt for me. I think he had a great draft. And I think the way you laid it out actually is I think under the radar, right? Like how he did it and how he kind of won. I also think Samuel had a great draft. Getting Drake May at 5 is pretty chalk, but following it up with Trey Benson, who I think could easily go ahead of AD Mitchell and Corum and Coleman. But Coleman, that's a little bit of a hotter take. But either way, I think getting Drake May, Trey Benson, Marshawn Lloyd at 3.5, that's good value. Tyrone Tracy at 4.5, that's good value. It's just like all either chalk value or good value. And I just think that he did a really good job just sitting there. He didn't make any trades. He didn't do anything crazy. We see a lot of trades go down and he just ate up the value. So I thought that was a really good draft that he had there. Who do you think had one of the worst drafts?
Maybe
we got to do this. We always got to kill somebody. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm gonna kill myself. I think my draft was honestly really shit. In retrospect, just knowing my team build, I went with my heart and not really understanding the board particularly well. And I will openly admit, I did not know too much about Kamani Vidal, but Kamani Vidal was the easy smash at the 402. I completely missed it, and I sat there with what could have been Kamani Vidal and probably Malik Washington at the end of the round, I think, which could have been a much better draft for me. But I ended up with Malik Washington and Rasheen Ali. And I just don't think that that's necessarily capitalizing off of what I had. Obviously, I was sitting there with 2 picks, both sitting in the 4th. So I wasn't going to be destroying it in value no matter what. But I still expect a little bit more from myself in those situations. What about you?
Yeah, I love you putting yourself out there like that, man. Sometimes you just got to do it, own up to it, and you learn the best from those situations, I think. For me, I thought our boy Edelstein here had one of the more underwhelming drafts, trying to come up with some different language here, not just like shit on our fam. But Troy Franklin at 207 is just above Leggett. Why? I don't want to overvalue draft capital, but I don't want to undervalue it either. And I think that's what we're doing there. Then you followed up with Jatavian Sanders at 211, a little too high for me, ahead of Senate. There's no way that can happen, in my opinion. Then Jacob Cowing, as Jake mentioned. I agree with him on that front. And then Devontae Walker, really, if you wanted to piss me off, this is the draft to execute right here. Troy Franklin, JT Sanders, Jacob Cowing, and Devontae Walker. Tez Walker's probably not terrible value in the 4th round, but he's just not a player I'm excited about. I'd rather go with Dylan Lobby easily, just with his opportunity. So yeah, I think there was a different direction to go with almost every pick he made here. I think he could have, even if he just leaned on draft capital, if nothing else, he would have probably had a better draft. Okay, super interesting. Dynasty Underdog Listener League 2 draft. Love doing these drafts. I mean, Jake's in here, our boy Matt's in here, Uriah, Josh. We have the whole crew in here, plus our listeners. We love doing these. Hope you guys enjoyed this edition. This one was a little bit more chalk. I think maybe our 3rd and 4th Listener League will be a little more surprising. The picks won't be necessarily right on ADP. So once again, thank you guys for joining me. Thank you, Jake, for being here. Please subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more. Peace out.